Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Siege of Skyhold, chapters 20 through 25, Effectively Indestructible, One Less Bottle, Fire at the Skyhold Docks, Last-Minute Preparations, Ward Rise, and Great Powers. In these chapters, well, we deal with the herdsman's forces, who are frankly pathetic, and then we go back to the siege location and get things ready in a way that I wasn't ready for, and I should have been, but we're just out here banging up our own wards. All right. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is here in the chat telling me that Sam, my dog, who is here again in the room, wants to mess with me. And that really has to be what's behind all of his actions, because it feels like I have just been messed with a lot recently. So these chapters, we go, like, it's always funny to me how we will get into these intense battles, and it's the kind of battle that feels like it's going to take ages to get through, but a lot of the time it's like a chapter or two, and before you know it, we have moved on. And that was sort of my experience with this, was the way that we ended the last section. I expected most of this next bit to be still at this location, and we get out of here surprisingly quickly. So, effectively indestructible, we start off in Sabé's POV. And when I said that the herdsman's forces were frankly pathetic, that is a direct quote from Sabé's point of view. I thought this was kind of fascinating. We find out later that the chameleons that he has been training and handling with his, like, animal mage affinity, they are actually altered, so they're not like regular chameleons. So unless they are basically sicked on someone, they don't do anything. And if they are sicked on someone, such as a group, like, go after Alustin's people, they are not able to determine who is part of Alustin's party and who is not. So they are sometimes going after their own folks, which isn't ideal, but it seems like there's not a lot to be done about that. And Sabé is like, I can beat these guys pretty easily, but I've got to do more than that. I need to distract them, so that Talia and Hugh are able to do what they need to do. And she's like, all right, I don't have anything real flashy, but maybe I can do something audible. I guess that's audial. You know what I'm saying. She tried to combine the water with her wind armor. The resulting detonation sent her flying off her feet and collapsed the armor around one arm. Oh dear. It also definitely drew attention. And all these people start to fire at her, and she does it again. And she's really hurting herself with this, Like, it's not just a sound of an explosion, it's like throwing her. But she's also gratified by how effective it seems to be. It's working what she set out to do. And then, I love this moment, then she tried to detonate her armor again, and nothing happened. She glanced down at her arm and started smiling. It turned out both she and Alustin had been wrong about how to combine wind and water into armor. Sabé found herself laughing as she wind-jumped toward the nearest group of enemies, already summoning her spear back into her hand. I love this moment. I love it. She's doing this shit and it's just like, yeah, it's blowing up and that's fine. And then all of a sudden it's just like, but what if I didn't blow up? What if I did something really dope actually in the middle of battle? Surprise! So then we go to Godric, and I fucking love this, guys. The opening sentence of his POV. Godric snarled as he climbed out of yet another chameleon's mouth. That really was cracking me up. Like, that must be fucking awful. You know, that must be awful. Ugh, gross. So, and there's like a sacred swordsman who is the steel mage, I think, and this dude is laughing at him as he gets his feet back under him after being swallowed again. It's like, when we rejoined Godric, I fully expected we would find him in the midst of like dealing a blow or taking a blow from the steel mage. I did not think that he was going to have been interrupted by a chameleon, but apparently this is just a fucking thing that keeps happening. And Godric is getting kind of worried because this steel mage that he is up against has armor that repairs itself so fast that it's like he may as well not be doing any damage at all. And the opal that he has been trying to use as a distraction doesn't seem to do a goddamn thing. Like, maybe other people are getting distracted, but this dude is not. And he actually says, I can't say I'm impressed so far. And he says, I'm fine with being the Havathi pawn. They're on the right side of history, whereas the monster you serve, right behind you, Godric interrupted. To Godric's shock, the man actually turned to look at that. I loved this so much, and it was such a shame it didn't work. It turns out his affinity can sense when a weapon's coming, and so he doesn't need to be looking at him. It doesn't matter. It does not do anything. But again, I did really enjoy this bit. Godric's just like, your shoe's untied. So he begins to rain his hammer down on Godric. And then all of a sudden, a barely visible ripple hurtled through the air and struck the Havathi. The man's breastplate dented in slightly, and frost formed across the dent. Then another struck him in the shoulder, staggering him back, followed by a third that knocked him away from Godric entirely. And he gets up really quickly and then headbutts the guy. And he does it 4 times. Godric took a deep breath, then smiled. He could smell the other man's sweat now. Before, the man's armor had somehow totally blocked Godric from smelling the Havathi, even with his enhanced sense of smell, which in turn effectively prevented Godric from casting any scent spells on him. Godric held his breath and assembled one of the few scent spell forms he knew in his mind's eye. The Havathi started retching immediately. Oh, God, you guys, this is so gross. He started to try to get away from Godric and get his helmet off, and Godric won't let him. Can you imagine that you, like, being stuck inside a helmet while you're vomiting uncontrollably and you, like, literally cannot get away? Oh, my God. That's a horror story. Oh, God. So Godric is holding him in place, and then he gets like shoved out of the way by something hitting him. And it's another fucking chameleon tongue shoving him. Oh my God. Godric couldn't get a look at his face. Too much vomit everywhere. He activated his force boots again. Now, I am going to say this right now. This steel mage is somebody. Okay? You heard it here first, folks. That is somebody. That's a big assertion I'm making, I know. Everybody stay calm. But I feel pretty confident in saying that was somebody. Do I know what that means? No. Somebody that we've met already? Maybe. Somebody that we're about to meet and not know that it was the steel mage? Maybe. But I think there is some significance, that's all I'm saying, to the fact that Godric couldn't see his face. I feel like that's going to be a thing. I'm just saying. Okay, so back to the story. It turns out that the thing that that helps Godric in this bit, I love this so much. He turns to face his rescuer, and it is Mackerel. The enchanted belt Hugh had chosen was still attached to the floating book as a strap, and its spell forms were glowing, but the belt wasn't attached to Hugh at all. You can use that belt on your own? Mackerel bobbed in the air. After this is all over, I owe you as many spine scratches as you want, Mackerel. I do really enjoy that. So, Godric reaches down and picks up the Havathi's hammer, and it yells at him, "Unhand me, villain." He drops it in surprise and then grabs it again, and it says, "How dare you? I demand you return me to the nearest representative of the Havathi Dominion." "I don't think I will," Godric said. Godric ignored the hammer's yelling, then used his steel magic to push it a good 10 feet below the ground. He could come back for it later. Can you imagine being a sentient object and somebody just like buries you for a little while to deal with you later? Oh, so undignified. So, then we go to Hugh. And it says, he ignored everything but his wards and his breathing. Inhale through the nose. Christify the spell forms up ahead. Exhale through the mouth, more slowly than the inhale. And he is going through this, and Talia is like delighted, having such a good time, sending dream bolts out, covering him. He needs a moment to catch his breath, and so she continues to cover him and says, "This is the last bridge. Are you ready?" He shook his head, then started assembling the next tunnel down, and then turned and nodded. A moment later, Hugh stumbled to his feet on the turtle shell. And Talia yells, "I'm in range, get ready," and her tattoos begin to glow. Hugh rapidly constructed a series of additional wards around them as he caught his breath again, including one under their feet. He made sure that all the wards other than the one below them were permeable to their bodies just in case. Sorry guys, that's Sam. That's Sam poking around with his giant cone. And the throne room exploded. A massive jet of fire blasted out of the shell's opening, scattering shrapnel out into the desert. A heartbeat later, more explosions blasted out of the rear opening of the shell. And then it lurched downwards, knocking Hugh off his feet and forcing him to drop Talia. The explosions kept going and going. Out in the desert, shards of bone grew, exploded, then repeated the process, scattering themselves farther and farther out. This is a much bigger explosion than either Hugh or Talia were expecting. And she's like, I think that it might just be like so much bone. With my bone affinity, it's like causing some sort of weird chain reaction, or it's feeding on itself somehow. And Hugh, at this point, notices that the chameleons, which had been like very aggressive, all of a sudden are just sort of milling around. They're not actually attacking anymore. And all of a sudden, Valia says, Well, it looks like you've exceeded our expectations." And she cuts through Hugh's wards, and because of the affinity we learn about later, the one cuts through all of them, and it's just, they're gone. That, I can't tell you guys, that really alarmed me. Like, her affinity is really scary. That's a pretty fucking, and it wouldn't necessarily always come in handy. Every situation isn't going to call for it, but it comes in handy enough that I feel like it pays for itself. And he shoots a starbolt at her. She doesn't even fucking try to deflect it. She just lets it hit the image of herself that she leaves behind. All of this is just wild. So I'm going to kind of like speed through the conversation here because honestly, I'm going to be frank. I don't feel like this convo is saying anything that we didn't know. Its main purpose is to inform the rest of the crew of who Valia is and her significance to Alustin. And I don't think they get the full idea of her significance, but it's just sort of to pull all the rest of them into this part of the story. So I don't feel like we need to go through it all. But I do like that she left Alustin trapped in a cage of sword echoes, and he got out and she doesn't know how, and he won't tell her, which I did find genuinely really funny. So yeah, he says the sun fence is destroyed, the herdsman is dead, and the sunlings will be scattered across the desert by tomorrow. You won't be able to use Dragonclaw Yardine to help supply Havathi's armies. You failed to achieve every single objective you came for. Oh, and a flight of Indris's children inseminated. All right, I'm going to take a moment here. Have some coffee. The word was incinerated, not inseminated, which was what I originally said. Forgive me, everyone. My God in heaven. A flight of Indris's children incinerated 7 of the 8 ships of your flotilla, then perched the 8th on top of a rock spire. I swear to God, that is so humiliating. Oh my Lord. And Valia's like, well, there's other stuff I can get done tonight. And I'm like, I mean, maybe, but honestly, this looks so bad for you. I don't know. I think that what she's was going to try and do was like maybe seduce all of these kids over to her side or attempt to it. I don't know what she was. The fact is that Alustin takes out this like decoy bottle that she thinks is a last ditch like chemical weapon. We find out later that it is not real. It's just like fish oil and olive oil and dyes with water and stuff. So whatever she was saying, I could like achieve a different objective, worried him enough that he felt the need to pull this bluff. And I have got to be honest here, because what Alustin says is like, the actual toxin takes months to manufacture and is obscenely expensive. It's not a particular priority to manufacture more during a siege. This is really showing my paranoia here, but I just don't know if I believe him that that isn't real. This just feels like the kind of thing that you would tell them all, of course it's not real, I wasn't going to use it, it was a whole, you know? And then, like, one day something happens and he pulls out his supposedly fake vial and tosses it, and it turns out to really genuinely be the thing. Because I don't trust Alustin or Candoron. And I appreciate that I don't trust them. This is not bad writing. That's not what I'm saying. I think they're written really well. They're written so that we mostly are okay with our friends going along with what they are instructed to do for the moment, you know? But then if you like push it any further, you're kind of like, all right, pump the brakes. I don't know about what their actual real motivations are. And the Havathi, I keep saying, like, their frustrations and suspicions regarding Candoron, they are not unfounded. They just seem to be incorrect about, like, her goals and personality. But the facts that they are drawing those conclusions from are correct facts. They are just looking at them, it seems to me, from a particular angle and drawing a conclusion that I think is erroneous. Now, I know that, like, what Sabe was saying about how they sort of allegedly believe that history is like a bunch of cycles, but they will take things that don't fall within their guidelines for it and sort of ignore them. So I'm not trying to say the Havathi are like good guys secretly. and that we're going to turn around and find out that, oh, maybe we were on the wrong side the whole time. I don't think it's that simple. I just think that where the Havathi are coming from seems to me to be kind of an understandable position, in so much as they have like issues with Kandaron. Otherwise, what they're attempting to do is just like conquer everybody. And that is the part where I'm just like, okay, well, now you're just trying to like bite Aethos's whole deal. And that I am never going to be in favor of like the colonizer, you know? But the fears behind why they feel the need to do this seem pretty genuine to me and seem to be actually supported by some facts. So it's hard for me to be that angry at them, because I just feel like the system is screwed up, you know, and they're not approaching it the way I think is best. But I can't deny that something needs to change here. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. So anyway, this is when Talia, who is apparently the one who killed the herdsman, starts to say that she's a great power. And Alustin interrupts. And when I say interrupts, that makes it sound like he goes, Talia, I would appreciate it if you would. No. He screams. And at the end of his little monologue, Hugh is thinking that he has never seen Alustin this angry, and that seeing anyone this angry actually is pretty rare. And this is sort of my theory when we find out that Arthur could be technically a great power, but he didn't take the title. And I think I said something at the time of like, probably doing that just puts a target on you, and who wants that? And it seems like that's exactly what it is. And he says the average lifespan of a great power is less than a week. There are dozens who die within days of proclaiming themselves great powers or being recognized as one. Many of them last only hours. Making that proclamation is declaring yourself a part of their games, and one or more of them will react. You make that proclamation, and you're going to draw attention to yourself that you can't handle. And he's like, 1, you're good. You're not that good. 2, you're putting your friends in danger, who are not as lethal as you necessarily. 3, I sure as fuck am not going to bring you back to Skyhold. That's not happening. 4, if you are a threat to Hugh, what the fuck do you think Kandaron's reaction to this is going to be? And all of this is very valid. So yeah, she pulls back on this, but I just like, this is the sort of thing that, there's a podcast I listen to called The Complete Guide, and they were asking this question, and I was like, you guys are fundamentally misunderstanding here. So, but I get what they mean, because this is also how I am. So what they were saying was essentially, if anybody gets to the point where they're rich enough that they never have to work again, and then they just keep working anyway, and keep like, you know, keeping their oar in, as they say, to whatever bits and bobs they've been working on, projects, businesses, whatever. They were saying, I don't get it. You know, if I wind up set up with enough money that I don't have to worry about anything else, I'm just going to fucking like completely detach from the rest of the world and live in my private little bubble of perfect bliss with everything I need, and a home I've personally designed to be exactly what I want, and amazing security, and, you know, whatever. Why keep getting up and putting on a suit and going to the office if you don't have to? I also feel this way. Now, don't get me wrong. I really like this job, so probably, even if I got set up completely, I would still continue to do something like this, but I wouldn't be doing as much. But I really do understand what they mean. Just back off and enjoy the fruits of your labors. But what they didn't get, I think, is that the kinds of people who make that sort of money, the kinds of like set up for life money that we're talking about, those are not normal people. Those are people who are, and I am going to say this with no qualifier because I really believe it. The kinds of people who make that sort of money are fucked up in the head. Okay? I'm saying it. You get to a point where you're in the high millions, billions range, there's something wrong with you. You have done something along the way that has, like, either you were born without or lost your sense of empathy and obligation to the rest of the human race. And you have decided that you are interested only in power. It's not about the money. The money becomes a side effect and is only a path to even further power. Like, people who make that kind of money, they're not doing it so that they can enjoy themselves. They're doing it so that they can have things that other people don't have to hold over them. It's not about living their lives and enjoying things. It's about possession of it, which is a completely different energy. So I'm bringing all this up because Arthur, the fact that he has decided, no, I'm not a great power. I can have my reputation, be very good at what I do. Everybody is intimidated by me, and I don't really have to worry about much. But I am not going to put my name out there. That is somebody who wants to enjoy their life in a genuine way. Their skill is coming from a place of, I want to push myself and see what I can accomplish and experiment and make the most of my affinities. But when it comes down to it, if Arthur were given an out and somebody was like, you trade in your power and you get to become a complete nobody even remembers you, and go have a regular life with your son, do you think he wouldn't do that? I think he would do it. I think he would at the very least really consider it. And then there are people who want to be great powers because that's the name. It's in the name. Being a great power. I mean, it's just like a status thing. It's not about the magic. It's not about wanting to help or protect people. It's not about wanting to push yourself and see what you can achieve. It is purely about throwing your weight around and seeing what you can get other people to do. And seeing what you can, like, how you can shape the whole world according to what you want. So I am hoping personally that Talia never reaches a point where she feels like she wants to say she's a great power. I feel like in this moment, she's sort of, it's not even that she necessarily really wants it that bad. It's more in the moment realizing that it's an option for her. Like, technically she could say it is exciting. That's not the same thing as wanting it and like going after it on purpose. So I'm hoping that everything Alustin says, and growing to understand a bit more about the consequences of it, that she will start to realize, oh yeah, no, that's not something that I want. And maybe it'll wind up happening anyway. But I'm just sort of hopeful. Anybody who's like, I'm not saying that being willing to take on that title inherently makes you a bad person, but I am saying that it sounds like a lot of people take it on for that reason, and that is what winds up getting them killed. So, you know, and also I just want to reiterate again that Candoron is a great power, and we don't really know how that went down for her, but it seems like she's pretty interested in power. So I am not saying that Candoron is fucked up in the head. Just saying. Anyway, so Dan says power for the sake of power. Yep. And Emmett Shard says no conqueror says this is enough and goes home. Exactly. And that's where I think that's why I really do believe that there are no good people who have that kind of money, you get to a point, if you are a genuinely good person who cares about people, where you just don't keep it. There are so many people all over the world, or even people that you know personally, who need so much help, that if you've got it and you have a conscience, you can't hold on to it and feel okay with the way you're living. But the people who can hold on to it, they don't have those kinds of qualms. That sort of conscience doesn't eat at them, you know? And, yeah, I sometimes am very envious of the fact that some folks can simply set aside like morality to become, quote, successful. But then I'm also like, I don't want to be that kind of person. It just sucks that it seems like those are the people who manage to get ahead and be in a position where they could help so many more folks than they ever choose to help, because they don't care, and that's why they're in this position. It's just a real fucking cycle. Dan says Talia is shockingly focused on being focused. On being focused on offense. Wait a minute. She is shockingly focused on being focused on offense? Shockingly focused on being offense? I'm a little confused, Dan. I'm sorry. Because, like, the whole thing last time was about how she is realizing that she's too focused on, like, weapons and offensive and trying to become a little bit more on the defensive with having, like, armor and stuff. So I don't know if that's relevant to what you're saying or not. I'm sorry. But update me. Okay, so this is when Hugh, like, they sort of wrap up this conversation here for now, and Hugh is wondering what affinity Valia was using, and we find this out a little bit later. We get a moment, though, of Hugh looking out over the battlefield at all of these people, and he just winds up vomiting over the edge of the turtle shell. And I would just like to state for the record that if Hugh never gets used to the carnage of battle, I would appreciate that. Like, he does what needs to be done, but that doesn't mean that, you know, to a point you need to be able to, like, manage it in the moment so that you don't completely lose your head, sure. But the fact that Hugh loses it after the fact, to me, means that he is still very sensitive to, like, the loss of life and understands what they're doing. It's not a game. These are real people dying, you know? So I really appreciate that about him, and I hope that he never becomes sort of numbed to this, you know? So, let's see. Alustin couldn't help but feel a bit bad about the destruction of the Sunfence, even if it had been strategically necessary. It had been an absolutely brilliant way to secure a food supply in a land too inhospitable for actual agriculture. It released a vibration into the ether that repulsed sunlings and sunmaws, but had little effect on other creatures. It was far less labor-intensive than Therastel's great mushroom caverns or the desalination magic Kilastus and several other coastal cities on the edge of the endless erg used to water fields. Not to mention, all sunlings needed to grow was sunlight and ether. And that hadn't occurred to me, but that is pretty brilliant. You just need to make sure that you are not in a mana desert and that there is sunlight. Boom, done. So they get on the ship, and this is when Sabé is like, all right, so make with the explanations, bruh. What's up? And Alustin says that he didn't know the Havathi would be there. They were just like planning to destroy the Sunfence, but they didn't intend to still be there when the chemical explosives went off, and we did not intend to assassinate the herdsman. And this is when Sabé asks about Captain Bandon being a librarian errant, and Alustin's like, you're gonna have to ask him about that. But Candorum placed his grandparents and Therastel as sleeper agents. He'd never even been to Skyhold until last year. So she's just got a lot of supporters. She doesn't have a cult, but she's got plenty of people who have thrown in with her. And this is when Talia asks about Valia's affinity. And he mentions that she is, first of all, a warlock. She's pacted with her belt of flying and the saber, the Helicotan saber, which gives her the same sort of weird echo affinity thing. That's what he calls it, even though he admits that the term echo isn't accurate at all. It says, his plant affinity is easy. Oh yeah, here it is. Athuema. Most people just translate it as echo and say the Lord of Bells had an echo affinity. That's honestly a terrible translation, one that poorly describes what the Athuema affinity could do. It could create phantasmal echoes of past actions, like the sword echoes or the way Valia can create echoes of her own body. It could copy one action into a material similar to the first action that it occurred with as well. Valia slices apart one sheet of paper I send at her. She can replicate that exact same cut across every other sheet of paper with the same glyphs in range. Hence why Athuema was sometimes translated as sympathy or sympathetic reaction. The final use of the affinity was something of a combination of the other two. It could be used to amplify the physical consequences of an action. Drop a stone in a pond, you can make the ripples larger and larger until the pond erupted right out of the ground. Hence, it often being translated as a ripple affinity. Valia doesn't seem to have mastered that aspect of her magic, thankfully. Ultimately, there simply is no satisfactory translation of Athuema in Ithonian. And I appreciate that it's mentioned that this is a meta affinity, but he never mentioned it before because he just didn't really want to talk to them about Helicote. Now, I don't know if that's just a retcon on the part of the author, but if it is, it's a pretty good retcon because I would still believe his explanation. You know what I'm saying? There are times where those sorts of things you're just like, yeah, okay, you just clearly came up with this idea pretty recently. But personally, I'm willing to give it to Bierce that this was a plan and that it genuinely was Alustin just not wanting to really, like, it's very clear talking about where he is from bothers him. It's a sensitive thing. So I'm willing to buy it. But yeah, this whole fucking thing with the echoes, like, this is just such a scary affinity, and there's just so much to be done with it. And he says that there are people who think that maybe it's like an effect of the tongue eater, and that it did something weird. And also mentions how in Helicote there were like areas that would make longer echoes, and that new forms of art were created, performances and stuff that like capitalized on these echoes, and people who were dancers who'd be able to fill the whole stage with echoes of themselves to like create this, you know, this performance, or people who would sing along with echoes of their own voice. And I thought that sounded so cool. And he says there's a legend about Helicote's fall. It's said that sometimes the air will ripple behind a visitor to the fields of glass and slag that are all that are left of Helicote, that their voices will hang in the air just a little too long on that flat melted plain. They say that the Lord of Bells cast one last spell as he died, set one last ripple in motion, that someday that echo would come crashing down on Havath. So, this is how he like leaves the conversation, and he goes down into his room in the ship and reads old letters and drinks. And there is one particular set of letters that he has torn and then put back together, and torn and put back together, and that he has read a lot less than the letters that like his sisters and mom sent. And he starts reading those, and I am really curious what that is about. Part of me is wondering if it's fucking Candoron, you know? I don't know. But, so, Then we go to chapter 22. And we have a lot here with Hugh and the other students again, as he's trying to like get them figuring out who they want to attempt to do a pact with, a warlock pact. And, you know, we have the description of a bunch of different creatures again, and the sentient beetle that's actually like a group of them. I'm not going to get into this too much, but I do enjoy the moment where Venta is like, I hear that they have like 4 or 5 or 6 clauses. How many do you have in yours? And he says that's pretty personal because he doesn't want to tell her that his has 27, which he thinks is pretty crazy. And I think it makes sense that he has that many because Candoron doesn't pact with people really. So it seems like she would want to be very protective of herself. And that's what clauses are all about, is just managing to put some boundaries in place so that you can keep control over the situation if you need to. And I'm wondering if she just feels more of a need for that than a lot of other great powers do. I don't know. So then we have the conversation about all of the different pickled foods, and pickled eggs are mentioned, and 7 different kinds. Ugh, gross. He says pickled potatoes, and Hugh says, who pickles potatoes? And I was like, why are potatoes where you draw the line, Hugh? Like, genuinely asking. There are a lot of real weird foods that are pickled. Potatoes just not raise a single eyebrow for me at all. That just seems like, sure, yeah, go ahead and pickle those. Why wouldn't you pickle those? Anyway, they have a discussion about will imbuing, and it turns out that that's basically like gonna fly in the face of Godric's armor's design, and so his father forbade him to try it. And he has some other options that he wants to discuss with his dad, but we don't hear what they are. We are there when he says, can we talk about them? And some of the people from Clan Castus, I almost said from Plan Plastis, from Clan Castus start edging toward them to like eavesdrop, but they get to hear and we don't. So fine, I guess. So let's see, here it is. I love this. Talia is talking about how maybe since there's so many ships coming in, they'll see Ava, and how she's like, I could gloat. And Sabe is like, do you think that Hugh would appreciate you gloating? Does that sound like something he would like? To which Talia is like, well then Sabe, you can just seduce Ava and it'll all break even, right? I do really enjoy that. And Alustin's over in the corner being like, that sounds like a fine idea. I don't get what everybody's so weird about. To which Godric is like, yeah, Alustin, no offense, but like, you're real messy. So if you say something seems cool, I'm going to go ahead and not do that. Which I can't help but agree. Alustin's a slut. You know, he really seems like a bit of a fuckboy. And I think that just not doing the same things as him seems like a good plan. He's a bit of a messy bitch, frankly. You know, like, this is a guy who this is a guy who I see never leaving his phone unattended. That type, you know, like, and we all have our phones attached to our hand for the most part, but there are times where that's just because you really enjoy playing Candy Crush every spare second you get, or have a Facebook addiction. And then there are the times where you don't want your significant other getting into your phone and opening the messaging between you and your quote big sister and finding out that there's a million dick pics on there and that is super duper not your big sister. So I'm just saying that is I agree, Godric. I just do. Dan is laughing. Alustin is a fuckboy. And McShar says Alustin is a disaster. Yeah, he's a real in the moment kind of guy. And dudes like that are often like really good in bed because they're not all in their head. They are just here to enjoy things, and they manage to really be like focused. But if you're looking for somebody who's like got a future with you, they're not the one. You know, they're not a person who's ever going to really be like thinking of you unless you're right in front of them, because they don't have any object permanence. They're like babies. So, yeah, anyway, Alustin is, it doesn't, he has some issues that he could probably work out in therapy. And, that's all I'll say about that. Okay. So this is when Clan Castus arrives, and it seems like they didn't, like, none of them knew that Clan Castus was coming except Alustin. This was a big surprise he had planned for them. And this is delightful. It's 30 or 40 of them, and 6 of them are Talia's brothers. And they are all very short and very redheaded, and they hug extremely hard. Somewhat to Hugh's dismay, he realized that by the standards of Clan Castus, Talia was actually reserved and aloof. You guys ever had this? Where you meet somebody and you're like, oh, they're very blank. And then you meet their family and you're like, oh, I thought they were very blank. They are super not that blank. These people are the ones that are very blank. Like, and you just name a thing. And we have this beautiful moment that was so, you know, I don't think I'm alone probably in what my expectation of this scene was, because Hugh gets yanked behind a bunch of crates and all of her brothers are standing there kind of crowding around him. And traditionally, if we're going to go with the real patriarchal system here, what we're going to get is Hugh being grilled by Talia's brothers regarding his intentions and whether he's being respectful and what is he doing here. And the whole thing feels like it's about to shape up into Hugh needing to defend himself and prove that he really likes her and, you know, whatever. And it's just something that we've all seen a million times, like scenes like this. And instead, you guys, I was listening to the audiobook. I was shopping at Walmart. And we get to this moment where Luthe says, so you're dating our little sister? And he's saying yes. And they get closer and kind of gather around him. And Luthe says, Talia didn't threaten you into dating her, did she? And I fell out laughing so like abruptly that the lady next to me jumped, because I just kind of went like, that's the thing about listening to shit in public, is like, you're kind of taking the risk of looking like a fucking lunatic every now and then. So they all start like being like, just blink once if you need us to do something. Do you need us to step in? And let's see. Has she kidnapped one of your family members? Don't be ridiculous. Talia told us Hugh doesn't get along with his family, remember? Which I just really want to mention here specifically. That I love, they know all this kind of information. They know where he was from, and they know about his relationship with his family, and they know that she has never been there. Like, all of this is the sort of thing that you may expect them to not be aware of yet, because maybe she doesn't talk to them about those sorts of details. But the fact that she has, to me, signifies that they're actually like somewhat close, or at least that she talks about Hugh a lot. And I just really liked that detail, that they're aware of all of this stuff already. And one of them asks if she snuck into his room and threatened him with a knife, because that's how he got his scar and almost lost his eye. And then it turns out, no, she just threw a rooster on him because he stole her knife, which it turns out it was his knife, but I guess it's hers now. So, and I really, really do enjoy also the story of one of them like fucking up a whole clan village, and then you find out that he was doing it to like help a stray dog that was being abused. which you guys know. How can you not like this is some John Wick shit. Fucking yes, please. I love it. He's the Baba Yaga. And finally, again, they come back to, is she blackmailing you? She hasn't hurt you, has she? And eventually, no, she hasn't hurt me or forced me to date her or drugged me or, and then they mention bees. Father took away her books and grounded her once for punching a merchant in the jewels, so she threw a beehive into the outhouse while Father was still in there, then somehow managed to roll a huge barrel of saltfish in front of the door. She was only 7 years old. You guys, that's so insane. Like, oh my God. That is insane. And he wants to know why she punched a merchant in the jewels, and we don't find out, but I really, really want to know. Just hoping that we come back to that because I'm very curious. But yeah, the fact that she I know that it's that she threw a beehive, so I'm trusting that these are real bees. But considering that now she's got these like dream wasps, I'm sort of like, feels like maybe she remembered that was an effective weapon. I don't know. And finally, he says, I'm dating her because I care about her. Yep, he's crazy. Utterly insane. Questionable grasp on reality. Probably dangerous to be around. No, not probably, definitely dangerous to be around. You're in good company, this is what we're trying to say, Tristan said. And then they all hug him. You guys, this is precious. This is delightful. I love this so much. How wonderful. Especially considering the fucking family that Hugh has had. He needs a family that accepts him. And also, can we just acknowledge the very strong Weasley family influence here? Tons of kids, all redheads, one sister, all the rest are brothers. Very warm, but like kind of a lot. It's extremely influenced, but it's still really distinctly its own thing. And I feel like that's something he has managed to do really well. You know, Bierce is like pulling all of these things that are very familiar feeling, but once you're done with them, they don't feel like a copy. It just feels like the very, very basics of the inspiration, you know? Anyway, so we go to Godric here, and he is talking to his father about how the battle is going, and he's like, not awesome. The Northern Front has collapsed, and I was able to like pull some of them away from the attack, but the rest of my team, I don't know what's happened to them. I was able to get on a ship to come back here, but I don't know what's going on with Headmaster Tarek. It turns out they're retreating, and they're managing to like, you know, do some damage while they retreat, but it's still a retreat. 4 days before they get here, if we're lucky. Day after tomorrow, if Havath decides to take a risk. So then we go into the preparations with getting the whole like ward system and defenses in place. And I love that it's mentioned somehow classes still went on. And I was like, really? But I guess that does kind of make sense. And we find out Tarek's forces had managed to stay together, but hadn't slept for days, keeping up a relentless fighting retreat. Just after midnight on the second day, Skyhold raised its wards. So then we go to chapter 24. I'm so sorry, guys. I've got 2 more chapters, and I'm over time already. Or not over, but almost. So chapter 24 is Hugh with just his friends in the big room, the ballroom where they had that dance. And they're watching all of the wards go up. And at first it doesn't look like much. Talia is even like, is that all? But then another one goes up and another one, and it's sort of like concentric circles going out, and they're all gridded in a way that you can only see out of like the corner of your eye, which I thought was a nice touch. And then they begin to test the wards and hit them with a variety of different like weapons and attacks and whatnot. It sounds pretty cool to watch, actually. Like, I have to imagine if you've got badass weapons that maybe you're not able to pull out all the time, getting to just unleash them on this sort of ward as a test would be pretty fun. And the hammer blow smashed entirely through the first 2 layers of the ward, though it halted against the innermost and strongest layer. The innermost impact ripple didn't travel nearly as far, but between the 3, the entire mountainside was bathed in orange light for a few heartbeats. That's crazy, you guys. Like, yikes, you know? Jesus. The ward healed the instant Archer pulled back his hammer, but soon opened back up again to allow all the archmages back inside the ward. So, I also appreciate that throughout all of this, Hugh was just thinking how nice it is to be with his friends, because he has been sort of drained by all of the, like, mingling he's had to do, which, God, I fucking relate. It's wild to be such a social person the way that I am, and also feel like it drains me dry. I don't know how you can simultaneously thrive on a thing and also, like, dread it. It's weird, you know? So then we go to this weird moment where Alustin is trying to cultivate an affinity of some kind, and there's a mana reservoir of some kind that he has been working on and keeping secret, apparently. So he's got that going, and then he's testing out these spells, and he's like knocking himself unconscious over and over again. And then finally, this bit, he doesn't knock himself out over and over again. The spells just keep failing over and over again. And then when it's successful, he drops to the floor and begins to convulse and has a seizure. So after it's over, he picks himself up, and it says, congealing a mana reservoir for an artificial affinity was a dangerous, painful affair. He should have done this under supervision of healers, but in the years Alustin had been developing his third affinity, he hadn't told anyone of his project, not even Kandaron. He wasn't about to change that now. And I am just dying to know what this is, because, you know, it could be literally anything. And I don't know if it has to do with the echo thing, if he's attempting to cultivate that. I don't know if that's a possibility. Like, there may be a list of things that are available as artificial affinities, and maybe that's not on it. I'm not sure, but I'm looking forward to finding out. So then we go to chapter 25, and really chapter 25 can be summarized as somebody fucked around and found out. That's what happens here. So they're looking out over the endless erg, and there are all these dragons coming, and everybody is like, oh my god, because they're quite large. And even the other dragon student is kind of looking freaked out. So the one that's at the lead, apparently, actual dragon, has a dragon fire affinity, which, like, that's lucky, because can you imagine having a dragon fire affinity and being a human? That would seem very useless, I gotta say. But anyway, this dude is nothing to sneeze at. But I gotta tell you guys something. God forgive me. So his name is Krakut. I'm pronouncing it Krakut. That's not exactly how the audiobook narrator pronounces it. And I kid you not, I thought so many times that he was saying crackhead. It just kept sounding like crackhead. And the way that this all shakes out, it felt like really insulting. Like, just, yeah, this fucking crackhead came out here thinking he could do something to Canderon. Like, it was just, I'm sorry, but I heard it and I was like, crackhead. And then I realized it can't be. And then I listened, and a couple times he says it in a way that I'm like, oh, I bet it's spelled this way. And then he would like drop into a sort of real quick pronunciation, and it went back to sounding like crackhead. So anyway, I just really struggled in this section. That's all I'm saying. So he yells for Canderon, the mangy, overgrown cat, to come out and bring him the exile splinter, which is hysterical. Like, did you think that she was just going to do that? Did you really think she was just going to be like, oh, okay, the scary dragon's here, so yeah, I'm just going to bring it on out. Here you go. What are you doing? So everybody's watching and they're like, oh boy. And then Alustin just says, well, he's an idiot. And his voice is amplified so that Crackhead hears it and is like, the fuck did you just say? And he's like, I said, you're an idiot. Yeah, you're very, very tough. And there's a lot of tough people around. I don't know if you noticed. I'm not worried about you. And he starts to do, I am Crackhead Ambrin, god of flame. None may stand against my... And then he just gets impaled on a bunch of crystals. So, chapters ago, Hugh noticed that the makeup of the sand was changing and was like, that's weird. It really seems like Canderon's pulling all of the quartz out of the sand. I wonder why she'd do that. And then we find out here it is so that she could gather it all directly around Skyhold and just use it as weapons. So it impales him, and then all these other crystals begin to grow up, and then it impales the Havathi. And you guys, this whole thing is so weird. As the dragonfire spattered against the sand, more crystals began to grow upwards, enveloping first the burning liquid and then the Havathi. Canderon's blue wing crystals withdrew, shrinking as they flew upward. Or not shrinking, no, withdrawing from the universe into some extraplanar space of their own, which sounds nuts. Like, I'm having trouble even picturing that. Crackett's body was the only one not entirely enveloped by the mass of quartz. Then the whole mass began to sink, the sand swirling around it. And Canderon flies out, sniffs the spot, and then just scratches sand over it, like she's just kicking it after having taken a shit. And everybody starts applauding her. And she's surprised because she's used to kind of being seen as a villain, and everybody's just like, fuck yeah. And she's startled. And Venta is like, okay, look, not for nothing, but if she can do that, why are they even trying? Like, this is just such a losing battle. Why are they doing it? And Edmondson said, greed and politics. An empire claiming to be the legitimate heir to Ithonian hegemony can't simply ignore Canderon. Their claim means nothing while the doom of Ithos still lives, which is apparently one of her names. That's something. And Talia says it seems like a stupid move on their part. And Archer says, unless something's changed. And Archer and Alustin exchange looks. And he's like, well, maybe they have somebody in their fucking stable now. Like, it's a dangerous thing to try and make a Kandaron level, being, but maybe they've got one, actually. And Thaddeus chimes in here and asks, what's Kandaron going to do with all the dragon bones? Krakat's not the first great power to become a part of Kandaron's larder, Alustin said. And that is the end of the chapter. So yeah, that was pretty fun. I really, really enjoyed this section. And, and I also like the fact that it seems as if Venta is flirting with Sabe, and I can't tell if Sabe is sort of interested. I think that she is, but yeah, I'm curious about like how this will go in interspecies relationship, because Venta's the Gorgon, right? Isn't she the one that's got the snake hairs? Am I misremembering? But curious about it, I'm not gonna lie. So okay guys, I'm gonna wrap up. Thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate you all. And thank you, Dan, for commissioning this as well, of course. And I'm looking forward to the next section. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.